Well, now, 10 years later, when we talk about grief and the immeasurable suffering for the families of the victims, it is so important to remember that everyone is really at a different stage in that process. The impact of a senseless crime like this can remain with all of us, and unfortunately, with other victims and communities that have also been targets of hatred and violence. However, it is so important to share the stories of those who continually triumph over the worst of adversity.
Joining us now to help us lead this discussion is licensed therapist Ashley Young from Everyday Wellness, who works with individuals and families to manage anxiety and to build resilience. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to begin with the process of grieving and how important it is to go through that process and understand that, as we mentioned, people are in different stages 10 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. People are familiar, a lot of people are familiar with the stages of grief: bargaining, denial, acceptance, anger, depression, but they don't always happen in a particular order, and sometimes we cycle through all of them more than one time. And I think it's important to recognize that people navigate grief in their own way. There's no exact right way to grief or perfect way to grief. It looks distinctly different for everyone, and so we have to hold space and make room for that.
You know, a part of our goal in doing this special 10 years later was to make sure that we honor the legacies, right? But in doing that, to be mindful that we don't re-traumatize people.
Right.
And a part of that, you say, in terms of how you approach these conversations, how you approach these topics, how you engage with people affected by a tragedy, is that you do have to remember it's not your job to try and fix everyone else's pain.
We shouldn't try to fix someone. It's not our responsibility. And sometimes in an effort to convey empathy and people don't have the exact words to share, they tend to redirect the trauma back to themselves and personal experiences, which is not helpful. And so some helpful things that one could say is that I'm sorry that that has happened. I can't imagine how that must feel, but we don't have to share our personal stories, at least not in that moment, if it's not solicited.
Yeah, and so showing empathy without making it about yourself. You also talk about how to talk to different ages about what happened, because you don't want to sugarcoat it as if it didn't happen during this time, but you want to make sure you're having those age-appropriate conversations. How should you approach the children?
You don't have to give all the gory details. Again, you mentioned it, you hit it right on, making sure it's age-appropriate. It's okay to say it's a very bad thing that happened, a very unfair thing that happened to a group of caring people. And you can give as many details as you can according to the age and as they ask, but it's important to let them know that you are able to ask those questions, you're available to ask those questions, and that their feelings matter.
What signs can we look for to see where someone is in that process? And I'll take this, again, this special as an example. Some family members very much wanted to talk about the legacy of their loved ones. Others very much want their privacy, which we respected. But even if you're related to someone who you know was impacted by this, how do you pick up the clues on where they are in that timeline of grief?
It may be a huge responsibility for a person to try to figure out where they are in the timeline, but it's okay to ask. You know, this is what I'm noticing, this is what I'm observing. I want you to know that I'm here for you. I don't know quite how to help, but maybe can you show me or tell me how to help you? And I think that helps us kind of understand where they are in their grief process.
Yeah. When you talk about the church and Mother Emanuel, I mean, these families are rooted in faith from the stories that we are seeing here this evening. How is it important to make a collaboration between your faith and also seeking professional help when it comes to the healing process and trying to make sure that you're getting over or getting through what happened, rather?
I think it's very important, and I love the intersection between mental health and faith. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, but I think it's important to recognize that you know, even in our church and in our belief, our pastors are kind of there to help us with our Christian foundation and provide emotional support, but then also we have faith-based providers out there, such as counselors, that can help provide that mental health support, that grief support, right? And the two of them can coexist together. It doesn't have to be isolated one or the other, and that you can have, you know, the saying, you can have Jesus and also a therapist also.
As a part of the season of commemoration that's being held by Mother Emanuel and really the entire Charleston community, they're holding a mental health panel. It is open to the community. Would you speak a little bit about the stigma that still seems to be associated with addressing mental health, getting counseling, even attending a session like that. I mean, they're hopeful that many people from the community will show up, but there is that stigma where sometimes if you show up at an event like that, people are like, oh, well, what's their struggle? What's their, what's their issue that they're dealing with?
Yeah, the goal is to continue to reduce the stigma, and we do that by showing up and trying to make connections. I think it's, it's still unfortunate that sometimes we still have these beliefs, but mental health is health. The connection between the mind and body is right there. What we feel, what we think here, we feel in our bodies, and I think it's important to recognize it as health. And so as people are showing up, it's important to recognize that community is therapeutic, being able to share, and just a reminder that we're not alone. When something happens like that, such a tragic event that the community is able to kind of be exposed to, we experience this collective grief. It's a shared experience. And so it's important that we honor one another by showing up.
And that's something to remember, when different anniversaries come out, throughout the year and you're missing a loved one, or if you've endured some sort of trauma, to just know that those connections and resources are available. Ashley, I want to close with this because in our notes when we were preparing for this interview, you shared the scripture, Isaiah 41:10, to offer encouragement for people of faith. And just for the family members, like I said, everybody's at a different stage in grief, right?
Yeah.
But the common thread that Billy and I have discovered in talking with people who were directly impacted by this tragedy is that they don't want anyone left behind in the healing process.
Yeah, it is important to remember for loved ones that have experienced loss, they want to know that their loved ones will never be forgotten.